Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Ola Tamanova, and it's my pleasure to see all of you here in Ukraine Media Center, Ukrinform. It's been 10 years of the war, and today is day 468 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. And today I want to congratulate all the journalists with their professional holiday that we celebrate today, and I want to thank everybody for their job during the war. I want to thank for what they're doing so that the world hears the truth about this war, about our heroic resistance, about our fight for freedom. Today, it happens so that in the morning, in the night, the topics for journalists to cover are a bit different, but still we have questions that are worth discussing in the journalist crowd. So I want to introduce our speakers today. It's Taras Shevchenko, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy for European Integration, Svitlana Ostapa, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Detector Media, Head of the Supervisory Board of Suspilne. Right about to join us is Oleksii Mustafin, Ukrainian journalist and TV executive. Right here in this studio with us are Diana Dutsyk, founder and executive director of Ukrainian Media and Communication Institute NGO, and Maryna Synhaivska, deputy director general of Ukrinform. Good afternoon, dear friends. So I would like to start this conversation probably with you, Mr. Taras, to talk about the media market. How has it changed during the full-scale invasion? What are the prospects and how is it developing? What are the trends that you're observing? Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I want to congratulate all the journalists with their professional holiday. I am a lawyer, but I work a lot with the journalists for years and years, and being a deputy minister, as well as being a professor in Institute of Journalism. So have a happy journalist day. This year was not simple, not easy. So talking about it in terms of economic issues, in terms of market, it would be too narrow. We would rather say how narrow the market has become, how is it difficult to survive. But I would rather want to start with something more optimistic. And in my opinion, one of the important positive news of the last year was the growth, the significant growth of Ukraine in the index of the freedom of press, which is calculated by foreign reporters, foreign journalists, and Ukraine made the leap of 27 positions ahead. I think that there were no such leaps before, and we moved on the place number 79 from 106th, which is still too far, but 27 positions ahead is quite a solid number. But at the same time, Ukraine was the same country where the most journalists unfortunately died. The second place is taken by Mexico, but Ukraine takes the first place by the number of killed journalists. So the year was very dramatic. It was a year of challenges, but the year of opportunities as well. The fact that the journalists mentioned in the increased index for Ukraine is the decrease of the influence of oligarchs on the mass media. So talking about the media market, it has grown less influenced by the oligarchs than it used to be before. I cannot also help but recalling that it was one of the positions of the European Union, one of the requirements in the context of necessity to implement the directive on audiovisual services in Ukraine, and within this year the media law was adopted. It came into effect, but also again we're talking here about the decrease of influence of oligarchs on the mass media, and the growth of Suspilne broadcaster is also growing as well. Ms. Svitlana will mention it because during the more than a year of the full-scale invasion, but since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, I'm convinced that the role of Suspilne Suspilne broadcaster has grown significantly, and they became way more influential both in traditional media, in radio, TV, but in digital media like Telegram channels as well. So talking about the market, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the media economy started contracting substantially. The number of commercial funds decreased significantly. The figures started improving a little bit, but they're definitely not those budgets that existed before the full-scale invasion. Another big tendency is the growth of the role of Telegram channels, the consumption of news through Telegram channels. The biggest Ukrainian Telegram channels have more than 2.7 million subscribers. They've become one of the quick ways of communication, but they have become also the challenge in terms of not complying with the copyright law, limitation of dissemination of information related to martial law. So the role and meaning of Telegram channels, whether it's journalism or it's media, should we congratulate the workers of the Telegram channels with the Journalist Day? We had a lot of discussions about bloggers, journalists, bloggers, blogging. Now we have to pay the same attention to the subscribers, to the personal private Telegram channels, administrators of the news Telegram channels, those who create news, who take interviews, and in their shape they look like media. That's one of the important modern challenges. The media law regulates traditional media, some new media, but in fact it does not cover Telegram channels, save for certain exceptions. If a Telegram channel wants to get registered as a media with the National Council, they can do it, and the law contemplates such an opportunity of voluntary registration. I think I will stop here on a number of questions that I mentioned. I'm ready to answer any questions that are about to be asked. Ms. Svitlana, let's talk about the journalism standards. How have they changed? The recent research is showing that self-censure among the journalists is growing. So what do you observe in this field? Yesterday I was present at the premiere of the movie of Slistvo Info, Occupation is a Price of War. The movie tells about the journalists who ended up in occupation and experienced violence by the Russian military. Those journalists were either killed or kidnapped. They ended up in captivity or experienced torture. The producer Anna Babinets mentioned during yesterday's premiere that is the film about journalist community, so they presented in dedication to the Journalist Day. It's an act of solidarity, but I think that the film is not only about the journalists, but about the role of journalists in the history of Ukraine. No matter how people want to replace media with propaganda or anonymous TV Telegram channels, free and pluralistic media exist in Ukraine, and this is what makes us different from Russia. Capturing Ukrainian territories, occupiers were trying to control them. First of all, they were looking for journalists and activists, the leaders of thoughts. And just as it was demonstrated in yesterday's film, they had the list of such people before the invasion. They knew whom they want, and it tells us about the role of media and journalists in the life of the country. What did the full-scale war demonstrate? I want to add a couple of words to what Mr. Taras just said, and then I will proceed to the standards, to what you've asked about. So what the war has demonstrated? It demonstrated that Ukrainian journalism can get mobilized very quickly, regroup and work under any critical conditions. In February 2022, the supervisory board and the board of Suspilne was considering the scenario for the full-scale invasion. It was like a couple of days before the beginning of full-scale invasion, 6 days, and the critical scenario was evacuation. This is the scenario that we had to implement. Do you imagine what is it to evacuate a big facility that employs 4,000 people all around the country? But here in Khreshchatyk 26, the building of Ukrainian radio with a huge number of people, it was really a complicated task, but we've made it, and we never stopped broadcasting. Now we have colleagues from Baltic countries addressing us and requesting us to share our experience. Second, Ukrainian media, under the conditions of war, continue standing for democratic values and complying with the democratic standards. This is what makes us different from Russia. Again, no matter what goes on, the journalists are trying to work in compliance with the journalist standards. Third, we have new military journalists, brave and dedicated. If earlier, starting from 2014, we knew them by their names, all those journalists, now there is a new generation of such journalists who was raised as great professionals. Fourth, Ukrainian journalists during the war not only informed the people, but in fact they document the crimes of the aggressor for the International Tribunal, and it will help to punish the crimes of the rapers and the murderers. Why is it important? One thing is when it's done by the law enforcement, and it's a whole different thing when it's done by the media. Sometimes there is more trust to the materials provided by the media, and generally the audience has more trust to the materials provided by journalists rather than to the facts reported by government agencies. Fifth, our investigator journalists continue to investigate the facts of corruption among the government officials of all levels, since they were forced to reorient a little bit in the beginning of the war. Like I mentioned in my previous item, that they were documenting the crimes. Then they realized that those who were embezzling before the war, they continue embezzling, and we cannot keep calm and silent about it. Six, we have Ukrainian know-how TV marathon. First, it was the saving of Ukraine of human resources, and it had maximum attention by Ukrainian spectators. Now, many of my colleagues don't think so. It can be read in the questioning of Detector media. On one hand, it decreased the influence of oligarchs, but it's a different thing rather than giving your shoulder, your support during the difficult hour. But it shouldn't be turned into a mandatory thing. And number 7, what Mr. Taras said, the role of digital media has grown incredibly, including social networks such as Telegram and digital online media. Our media, thanks to the fact that they comply with the standards, and if they do not, it's been reported by the Committee of Journalist Ethics. We review such complaints. They assist in creation of strong civil society, and thanks to the strong civil society, thanks to our free media, we were able to resist. Ukraine has not fallen within 3 days, and on a daily basis we thank the armed forces of Ukraine, but I'm convinced that today we can openly and honestly thank our media and our journalists. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Svitlana. Ms. Diana, I would like to have you join our conversation. What are the changes that your NGO documents? A lot was said by my colleagues. I would like to start with something optimistic. So first of all, we don't have this illusion anymore. We have a ruined illusion as to the standards of the Western media. We realize that we are not worse, and sometimes we can do even better than they. It's very important, because if we look at it from the point of view of the Ukrainian journalistics, who got the new status in the system of global media thanks to our colleagues who got the Pulitzer Prize, it's very important. We already transitioned to the status when we are being identified as Ukrainian journalists, because we're not present in that space. There was Russian journalism before, and Western media were looking at Ukraine through the prism of Moscow. They had all their journalists there, the journalists of the key world media outlets, and it has changed within this year. I hope there will be no way back, and it's a very important thing which imposes additional responsibility on the Ukrainian journalists themselves, because it's them, no matter how it sounds, it's they whom it depends on how the world sees this war, how the Ukrainians see this war. It's about the investigation of the war crimes that my colleagues mentioned, because it's an important part of the job that is being done by the Ukrainian journalists. And I also would like to add that we have a very powerful civil sector in the sphere of media, and such sector does not exist, at least not to my knowledge, in European countries. I know there are some separate organizations, media organizations, but Ukrainian media sector is very powerful, and it influences everything that is related to media, starting with the development of the legislation and ending with the control of the standards that we've mentioned here. So talking about something critical, I will be less constrained in terms of optimism about the decrease of influence of the oligarchs. It did decrease, but on the other hand, we have to realize that when the war will be over, there will be attempts to bring this influence back. We now see the channels, they think how to build their strategy after the war, what to do, how to survive. That is quite natural, but I think that when the political processes such as elections will begin, we will see the return, at least in part, to what was going on before the war. And probably now is the time when we have to develop the safety switches to make sure they don't come back in full. Another risk related to this issue, I think that everybody was talking about digitalization and Telegram now, and now that there is a new class, maybe it's too early to call them oligarchs, but new class of people who wield completely different types of media, not TV channels, and they will in future influence the political system of Ukraine as well. We have to realize it, and today it's not being regulated in any way, because social networks are not regulated in general. We have no regulation of Telegram, no influence over it, so it's subject to discussion. So those are the challenges that we're facing. They still remain in front of us. Thank you very much, Ms. Maryna. The work of the State Information Agency during the war, how has it changed? What are the challenges that you were experiencing? Good afternoon. I would like to thank for the invitation to this discussion, and I want to avail myself of opportunity to congratulate all the colleagues with their professional holiday. It's going on under very difficult circumstances, and every year it's setting new challenges. I just want to thank my colleagues from Ukrinform. I don't know, was it the 19th or 20th rocket attack in the morning, but at the 6 o'clock in the morning we started planning who phones where, who goes where, due to the catastrophe on the Kakhovska hydraulic power plant. It's about the capability of our Ukrainian journalists to put aside their ambitions, their emotions, their tiredness, and to work as much as they need. Because as soon as the work has started, Ukrinform was ready for remote work. We established this opportunity, this capability, before the COVID. So we gathered here in Ukrinform and we decided who communicates how. We cut off everything redundant from our website, everything that was not related to the war. We switched all of our services on 24/7 operation. We taught our colleagues to work with the site, with the news, because we don't have such a human resource to work 24/7 in 8 languages. However, we've made it, and the first 2 months until the enemy was ousted from Kyiv region, it was a non-stop operation. But the most difficult back then was not to get succumbed by the panics and to verify any information that we were getting from multiple sources, and to broadcast something verified, something that was coordinated with the Ministry of Defense, the general staff. It was difficult, but in the beginning of the war we made it, broadcasting only verified information. Now our archive will be a massive for research by the future generations of the scientists, because we were working online. We were gathering information about the offensive at Kyiv, because journalists were working in different regions 24/7. Everything that we could get is in our archives. It was difficult when my colleagues ended up under occupation. It was difficult not to be able to help them to get out of Mariupol, out of Kherson. But fortunately everyone saved themselves, but it was very difficult time. Now again, apart from constraining ourselves within a desire of being extra sensational, even if a top-level government official of European structure calls the number that I want to convey to everybody, we still verify that information, because it might be a mistake, it might be an improperly prepared document. So the standards, they have become of more value than they used to be before the war. It's a little bit different with the balance of point of views, because what Russian side gives, you never know whether it's a psyops or propaganda, or is it truth. So we try not to give those messages by Prigozhin, who was capturing Bakhmut for an umpteenth time. We ask for the reaction of the Ukrainian agencies. I think it's still right, because we may lose some momentum, because momentum is to give the verified information on time. Another problem that we were facing, I'm talking about our editorial, is the professional burnout, emotional burnout of the journalists, because as the therapists say, what do you have to do? What do you have to do when you feel difficult? Don't read the social media, don't watch the news. Ukrainian journalists cannot help watching the news because they make it. So we added this program of mental health of the editorial. I appreciate the input of Svitlana for implementing this program. I advise to all of my colleagues to apply for those kind of programs. It demonstrated that 93% of those who said that they need help, they have professional burnout indicators, and it will have consequences even after our victory, because the journalists, they have to be preserved. They have to be preserved in order to rebuild the country, so we could continue doing our job in a quality manner to the in full force. Thank you, Ms. Maryna. Mr. Oleksii, we started talking about the standards, how they have changed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. What's your opinion? I first of all have to apologize for being late, but from what I've heard, I like the phrase of Diana that let's start with the good news. There are no standards. I wouldn't call it good news. Maybe there were some illusions about the Western journalism standards, and some may still preserve them. We are seeing it on a daily basis. Yesterday there was another time when we were able to observe it. The publications in the leading Western media who are considered to be very objective are being quoted without verification, but through those media, frequently media campaigns by Russia are being launched, and it can be seen with the naked eye. Still, our media continue publishing those messages, sometimes even adding something by themselves from the sources of the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. Again, talking about whether we know whether it's true or not, whether the Russian Ministry of Defense says something, whether it's true or not, I can state that it's not true. Like Roman Cymbaluk says, as they open their mouth, if they open their mouth, it means they lie. Well, but back to the standards. I think that the war has demonstrated the importance of compliance with the standards, and this is, in my opinion, as a spectator and reader and listener, this is the function of the media, because anybody can report anything, because any person with a phone is a source of either information or misinformation, and the professional media cannot compete in speed, in promptness of presenting of this information, but the task of the mission of the media is to filter in compliance with the standards. I don't think that the standards are changing during the war, or it's necessary, or should we refuse to standards. No, the standards are way stricter during the war, including 2 or 3 opinions of the events. It's just that the second or third opinion should not be presented by the misinforming Russian sources. But talking about my opinion, not as a manager, but rather as a consumer of information, the evaluation of condition of our mass media, I may be repeating myself or repeating the opinion of my colleagues, but Ukrainian journalism demonstrated that they are really cool. We have good journalist school, reporter school. We have high literature that sometimes can give a handicap to anybody in this world, and we have to give the Ukrainian professional journalists their due, because during the war people demonstrate, well, that there are not only journalists but they are humans. But as to the condition of the media, mass media, I have a lot of questions to them. On one hand, it's been explained by the fact that the journalists are humans too, and under conditions of the war, it's a remote war, is the war for life, for existence of every single Ukrainian. So the journalists, they are Ukrainians, and they cannot just stand aside looking at it in the classical understanding, in the classical sense of this expression. Well, it's like, what claims can you have to journalists? But the question is that during this hot phase of the war, well, I mean, that phase was hot too, but I mean the direct invasion, our media have grown into politicians, which is very, very dangerous, because I'm a former politician myself, and I can tell you, when everybody keeps silent about the corruption and then everybody starts talking about this suddenly, it's the conjuncture, is the politics, and in some case, or in one case, someone might have been dishonest. And as to the issue of fighting oligarchs' influence, well, we've taken over the old oligarchs, but it's the matter of price of this victory, because now we're back again, maybe due to objective reasons, back to 90s, when media was a state property. Yes, in the beginning of the 90s, some media were private, but the massive of the TV channels was state property. It now it works. I won't say as a Swiss clock. There is a lot of breakdowns, but it works as a single team. In some sense, it's a self-discipline, but there is an external influence too. In my opinion, it's worse than the oligarchs. Obviously, we're not gonna go back to this condition that we used to be in before the invasion, but we may switch to a different state with the young oligarchs, and they will be no better than the previous ones. It will be a step ahead compared to this condition we're having now, because we've said goodbye to the state-owned media. But as you know, in this famous joke, they say goodbye but they don't leave, and it's a huge problem. And just to wrap up, I don't want to take a lot of time, and getting back to the non-critical perception, we've switched from the habit. A lot of people gave up that habit. Someone under force, under pressure, we gave up this habit of looking at the world through Russian prism, but the dependency on Western mass media is better than dependency on Russian media, but it's still bad because it's not about the sources. The sources may be Western, like world level, global level. We have to reference them and to work with them, but when they republish, what I was talking about is the expression of the minority complex that we have. Obviously, we understand that it's a war going on, it's a conveyor of news, but verification, fact-checking, use of illustrative materials as a fact, this is something that cannot be tolerated. That there is an address, save the animals, and those illustration of the dogs, it's like an advertising on the fence. Well, you don't know what I'm talking about. The flooding in Kherson was illustrated with the dogs from Thailand, like small nice dogs, and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, they post this ad, save the dogs, but TSN puts it in their news strip. That's a big question to them. I don't want to blame them, and I don't want to pay attention to those details. It's about the clickability, clickbait nature of the headlines. Everybody wants on their headline to be clicked upon. But anyway, thank you. Yeah, this is exactly what I was going to ask about the quality of the content generated by our mass media. Let's talk about this. It's one of the big questions of something of concern to our media community. As Ms. Svitlana mentioned, is the joint TV marathon. Everybody keeps saying that it was necessary in the beginning. Everybody recognizes this fact that it was the most right decision. But what now, Mr. Taras? What will be the destiny, and how do you see the development of this event? Well, you started asking about the quality and the marathon. You know, I think those are two different things. Well, let's start with marathon, and then we proceed to the quality. Well, in the beginning of the marathon, Ms. Svitlana recognizes that it was useful. But I think that in the beginning you were not recognizing that it was useful. No, I've written that it was useful back in March 2022. Well, alright. I remember that even in the beginning not everybody was recognizing the importance of it. Well, look, legally the marathon exists in compliance with the memorandum signed by the channels. My assumption is that marathon is gonna exist as long as the martial law exists, and martial law is a special period I think that sometimes we keep forgetting that there is a martial law, war going on. There are laws, regulations, limitations, and the life in Kyiv, apart from the air raid alert, is peaceful. But talking about the war and certain government regulations, state regulations, not about the war, it's the matter of balance. On one hand, there should be limitations and they exist. On the other hand, our strong side is in independent media, independent broadcasting, and in the freedom of speech, even in the strategy of information security. One of the strategic goals is the access to public information, openness, and protection of the rights of journalists. And we continue standing in that position. That's why the TV marathon that has changed a lot since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, if it included all the channels in the beginning, in 3 months the TV groups started segregating different channels for other broadcasting. Now TV marathon, from the point of view of activities of TV channels, it's just one part of it. Svitlana has their TV marathon that works based on the regional TV channels and is being broadcasted all across Ukraine. Sometimes when the foreigners come and they ask us about the TV marathon, having listened to the civil organizations, they have an impression that TV marathon is the only thing that exists and all the rest are prohibited to broadcast, and to their surprise they find out that there are other TV channels existing, and TV marathon is not the only thing going on in the media space. And fortunately or unfortunately, the reality is such that TV is only watched by that part of population which is being consumed by Telegram too, which works in compliance of the journalist standards, and they take this attention from the TV channels. Well, I don't know about the ethics, we'll proceed to TV channels later, but let's give the floor to our colleagues who have something to add. Well, I want to say a couple of words about the memorandum that was a voluntary story by the TV channels and so on and so forth, but now we understand that TV marathon exists only because the government stimulates its existence by funding from the budget. And that's it. As soon as there is no funding, the marathon is done with. This is how it's connected. Miss Svitlana, please. Earlier, first non-publicly and then publicly, when the government representatives were asked how long the marathon would exist, they would say until the end of the martial law. Now what we're hearing non-publicly, that until the end of the martial law and then 3 or 4 months of transition period. I think that it's excessive. That's first. Second, for what I understand, it will exist until the end of the year for sure, because funding is already allocated. For Suspilne, what positive changes have happened? We have all the platforms rating grown. Here you mentioned Telegram, but I can tell you that the regional broadcasting ratings have grown. The Culture TV channel rating has grown. Our social networks, including Telegram, they grew for some incredible percentage. Do you tie it with the marathon? I think that people got tired of marathon and they're looking for information on different platforms. But to be objective, in the beginning we cannot compare the ratings because there was no official measurement, and then when the measurements started, we can compare that the share of the TV marathon is decreasing. For example, if it used to be 15 and it's 8 in April, but then it's 10 again in May, it's mostly related to the missile attacks. But as to the quality, Detector Media continues to monitor TV marathon, this all national TV marathon News United and Freedom. who is curious, they can check the techniques, but I want to mention the political balance. This is something that influences the society in a negative way. The politicians say we implement censure in TV marathon, we do everything as directed by the government, but we say no, we do it in compliance with the standards. No one tells us what to do and how to do it, but they don't believe us. They say we're disbalanced, but we have monitored the detector where the balance is seen in other slots, like other TV channels do their parts of the marathon. There are mostly two political forces present: the servant of the people and another one, dependent on the media groups. So as to the standards, Suspilna continues complying with them in the marathon. That's true. As to the ratings, I mentioned it already. I would also like to add something to the question about the journalist standards that was asked before. It is the first time that the media law is approved, and first it mentions the code of ethics of Ukrainian journalists that it should be complied with. Obviously, I would like people to comply with it, not because it's written in the law, but because people realize that it's something that they have to do. In principle, there was the ceremony of award a couple of days ago. There were hundreds of materials, and representatives of the jury, they said that all the materials that were submitted, they were made in compliance with the journalist standards, and it's something that I'm happy about, that people comply with the standards. It's really important, and among those nominations, they were not so numerous, so Suspilna got 5 awards. This is about the quality. I take pride in my colleagues. while I'm giving the floor, I want to apologize. I will have to leave a couple of minutes earlier. So my opinion about the ratings of Suspilna is that the ratings have grown because of the growth of quality of Suspilna, and those awards, they corroborated. And I think that there are certain TV events that will have the highest rating, no matter who broadcasts it. For example, it's Eurovision, or World Football Championship. If Suspilna shows them, then Suspilna will have the biggest ratings. But I know that there were days when some Suspilna channels were taken first and second step in the ratings, but well, let me add just a couple of words, honestly. Now that you've mentioned the important events, I can tell you that the spectators, the audience, they now perceive the marathon as a single channel, and if you check the daily ratings, you will be able to see that the biggest ratings are in the evening slots when there are summary news. No matter who does those news, whether it's ICTV or 1+1, or, well, no matter who does, whoever has this slot in the evening, they have the highest rating, you see? So it can be 10 all around the day, and in the evening it's gonna be 15, specifically at that slot. So transformation of marathon into one channel is harmful for brands. This is why some channels, they started withdrawing from marathon, like ICTV2 or 1+1 Ukraine, but without information broadcasting. So they just wanted to preserve their brands so that the spectators don't forget that it's them over there in the marathon. Well, about the ratings, I'm recalling the way we were trying to do it in Inter, when we were trying to give people the bonuses for the best materials. If Inter was 3rd or 4th in the rating, they were getting bonuses because people keep watching it. So this is the situation. But talking about marathon, first of all, I have to recall, as a person who is curious about the history, let's recall how it started. the first attempt of the marathon was way before the invasion. It was the day of the unity, and it was the day of sorrow of Ukrainian television. Even during the bloody regime of Kuchma, it never happened so, when all the channels broadcasted the same, and obviously when they redistributed the slots among themselves, that was a step forward. You were right to say that it exists only as long as the government funds it, but even as we finish it, as soon as the martial law ends. But you know, it's like that same joke where here I started getting good cards. But let's imagine the perfect situation. The marathon is over, the channels are withdrawn, so where do they get the funding? The oligarchs cannot fund them anymore. The foreign investors, God forbid, or if the government funds them, they will get the blame from Europe, so there will be no voluntary funding by stake raising or fundraising or something. So we have to understand what will be the condition we will be ending up in. We will only start getting problems with the mass media as soon as the marathon is over. Mr. Taras, if you have anything to respond, and then I will proceed to the topic of Telegram channels, like one last question. I want to say about the advertising market. It went down significantly, and now there are attempts by the media groups to change or to withdraw from this general panel, to make measurements different, to engage different measurement platforms, rating platforms. Every media group is thinking about it, so they're looking for ways to survive further on. We understand that it's not gonna be the same way as it was before the way, so there is a lot of challenges ahead. Well, Mr. Taras, we were talking about the Telegram channels. We know they have great audience. Now we were talking about the quality of such information. We understand that fact-checking is almost non-existent there. It's mostly about the promptness, about the speed. Sometimes they outrace our traditional media. So does the government try to somehow have control over this process, or is it not timely? I was asking you to leave earlier. I have a meeting with the minister in 7 minutes, but you're setting the topic for another hour of conversation. Well, this is an incredibly important topic, but I will not be able to disclose all of it here, and it would be interesting and necessary to listen all of the speakers here. It wouldn't be correct to say that the laws don't cover the Telegram channels. The laws cover all the ways of dissemination of information, so the limitations that are said there, for example, the limitation on the information of the movement of troops, they also cover Telegram as well, and we've seen that within the last week the security service of Ukraine was detaining bloggers who were spreading such information. But obviously the complex of issues is way more broad. For example, the sanctions of the regulator. There is no regulator for such media, and maybe Detector will implement some permanent monitoring of non-compliance with the ethics by the Telegram channels, just in the same ways that they did to the TV channels. So let's let Mr. Taras go, and let's give the floor to Ms. Diana. We've just finished an extensive research about TV channels, but before proceeding to TV channels, I want to add a couple of words about ratings. The ratings should become transparent finally, because those ratings are not public. I mean the ratings of TV channels. First, they did not exist. No one was understanding what was going on. We were just doing some divination on the coffee, and now it's like the experts know, but the public does not know what's going on, and it's a bad story as well. I apologize, because it's directly related to the quality. People have to understand. Previously, all the ratings were published, they were transparent, we could see them in real time, but now it's non-existent, and we have to get back to this transparency, because otherwise there will be also space for manipulations. Well, this is what I wanted to say about the ratings. Now about the Telegram channels, I really want to say that we had an extensive research. It included a social logic component. We were monitoring the content, and there were also in-depth interviews with a number of experts, and talking about the regulation part, the majority for the time being takes it quite critical, quite skeptical. I mean, the capability of the state in terms of influencing the Telegram channels, specifically in the cases where you cannot find out who's behind them, and it's a huge number of such Telegram channels. So even if by some indicators, by some sources, we see that behind this or that Telegram channels, they may be an N or M or K person, no matter who, we don't know anyway, so legally we cannot prove it, and it's always a matter of our inability to protect the consumers' rights who read those Telegram channels. Yes, SBU detains the bloggers who publish something somewhere, but it's only because they're not anonymous. They show up in the social networks, we see them, and sometimes they do it out of their stupidity, so to say. Someone does it intentionally, and someone does it just occasionally. But talking about the Telegram channels who frequently are involved in information influence, they don't show, they don't disclose their owners, they don't disclose who's behind, and you cannot reach out to central office of Telegram, unlike, for example, Facebook, who appointed their Ukrainian representative with whom we have communication. So now there is a huge question in front of European countries as well, including this key question, the one that, for what I know, the Europeans, they want to seek to have those Telegram representatives with whom they can communicate for the cases of violation of human rights, rights of those who consume the Telegram content. And in this case, Ukraine cannot be autonomous, because we have to move along with the other countries who work out the legislative regulatory base of that issue. We cannot do it by our own. We have to unite our efforts. Dear friends, if you have anything to add, if I may, I would like to say a couple of words. That Telegram channels, specifically those that Diana mentioned, the anonymous, they just parasite on the work of professional journalists. They parasite on our resources, they steal our information. I'm telling you this quite straight. It's difficult to trace, and even when we trace and when we try to address them, I was writing an appeal by myself, even to their emails, to the admins of the Telegram channels, when they were taking information without any copyright. I'm not even saying that like they should pay us something or something of that kind, but they should at least use the reference. But there is a parasite which is called almost the same, Ukrinform, but they have a space after the first three letters. They use our information in part, and sometimes there is such a trash over there. And I was complaining, I was submitting complaints to the Telegram about the channels, but I finally received a message that you were banned by administrator and you cannot submit any more complaints to this channel. So copyright is very important here. I'm talking about the copyright that is non-existent in Telegram in principle. Well, my opinion is quite skeptical about any activities, any attempts by the state to control something or to manage something, usually it's not efficient, it's loose, and it always results in suffering of the innocent. So again, I apologize for talking about defenses, but there's a lot of things written on defenses. How should we fight it? Let's create a government inspection who will walk around to check what's written, and then there will be another inspection who will inspect the work of that inspection. So I can say that there are a lot of people passing by the fence, but we will have the same situation that we have with the shelters in Kyiv. That first it was Klitschko inspecting them, then it's the regional district administration. The people have died, you cannot do anything about that, and then you imprison the guard. Well, in my opinion, they're doing the right thing, because even if they don't imprison the guard, what will be the use of it? But again, the government work is usually without result, and if there is any result, it works against the audience. And the same thing is about SBU. Better to fight the espionage by SBU rather than by some random people's gangs. But we know about all of the shortcomings of our SBUs, so in my opinion, just like any fight with misinformation, it boils down to fighting the sun rabbits, not in the sense that it's a right analogy, but we're fighting the rabbits, but their source is untouchable. We will just exhaust ourselves. Detector Media or someone else will monitor the Telegram channels, so we will spend the resources just in vain. Well, you cannot monitor everything because they're very numerous. No resources are sufficient for that. But I want to add a little bit of optimism here. When we had this focus group, the readers of the Telegram channels, we wanted to understand whether they take information critically, the information that they consume from those Telegram channels, anonymous Telegram channels. And I have quite a constrained optimism here, because the people used to say that they see that there are manipulations, there are fakes, and if they see any information that they have doubts about, they try to verify it. For example, I switch to the channel of the mayor of my city, or I'm going to the channel of Ukrinform or some local media or Ukrainian Truth. But nevertheless, it means that the audience has changed. So we're talking not about the change of the media, we have to talk about the change of the audience in terms of what they consume, and they also changed in terms of the way they consume that information that they do consume. And now from every corner, anything that can speak is speaking about the media literacy, Russian propaganda and fakes and so on and so forth. Well, it has brought its result. It brought this issue to a different level. Like a couple of years ago, we were gathering in a narrow crowd, the experts, and we were saying that we have to increase the level of media literacy, but the war has changed those things, because this issue was brought at the political level. President, mayors, politicians, all the media say about this. Even the oligarchs' channels, who never used to tell you about that, they tell you about media literacy. Is the reality, and it's optimistic. The people have grown more critical. Thank you for your optimism. Telegram channels aimed at Ukrainian audience are real numerous. I've checked the Detector research, and they refer a number of sources who are involved in professional research of the Telegram channels, so they call the number 51,000. Imagine it for Ukrainian audience. Obviously, there are such that spread Russian propaganda, Russian narratives, and we try to trace them. And give the audience the list of those channels. Please be cautious. They mimic Ukrainian channels. Also, there is a research by Internews Network last year. I'm getting confused a little bit about it, but they said that 60% of Ukrainians get information from Telegram channels. It's a huge number, but I have to say that Telegram channels are not just Telegram channels. There are anonymous Telegram channels, but they're a network as well. If you check, they broadcast the same message within the same second, but there are media Telegram channels who aim at reporting the information on Telegram first and then in their websites. So the media Telegram channels have grown a lot. We have a network of Telegram channels of regional media, and they grew 6,000 times. In Chernigiv region, our Telegram channel is the biggest. So obviously, I think that as to the regulation, when the law on media says about the regulation of Telegram channels, our colleagues said that, come on, let's not do it because you are not gonna make it. So I think that we should look for an office of Telegram and talk to them. We have to go to a different level, but it may result in the same thing that happens now to Twitter, some kind of chaos. So I think that really media literacy, the audience, they know whom to trust, and probably they get that information from the media, from their Telegram channels, depending on how they feel more comfortable. If they're on the way, you just scroll your strip on the phone. It's a platform. For example, a person may check through the channel of Ukrainian Truth or other media outlets. Thank you, dear friends. If you have any questions, please join our conversation. Rakuta, Anastasia, Ukrinform, could you please tell us how you see the development of the media market after the war, and what are the problems that it's about to face? Or we're looking for another panel discussion here. I will try to be as brief as possible. This is something that I keep thinking and writing about all the time. In my understanding, it will be absolutely different from what it used to be before the war, because we lose the market of printed media completely. In that format that newspapers used to be issued, they are not gonna come back. Specifically the regional ones, they're not coming back after the war. It's impossible even from economic point of view, but also from the point of view of change of these media consumption habits. The audience will hardly need those pre-war newspapers in the format that they used to be. There will be printed media, I think, but they will have a different format. For example, now some central media experiment, like, and we started issuing like almanac journalism that used to exist back in ages, when they make not a weekly journals, but they do it on a regular basis, something that you can spend a lot of time reading. There is some good analytics, good publicistics, but that's not a news format anymore. Everything that's related to the news is now online, and this is something that we will be observing. Well, but Forbes and Envy do something that is more of a journalism rather than literature, what they do, but it's not in a daily or weekly news format. Those are the long formats that require more time for consumption. But talking about the TV, the story is complicated. I'm afraid to forecast anything that is about to happen to television. A lot will depend on the political situation after the war, because the media groups, they still remain no matter what. The owners, they remain the same, even though, as Mr. Oleksii said, they have no right to broadcast or fund them in or exist and influence in the same format that they used to do, but all those things remain. What will be the transformation after the war? Well, let's see what formats they will be able to find, but they are currently in search. And what I'm seeing, they understand that this multimedia nature, multi-platform nature, that's the way that they are about to follow. And probably in classical understanding, the TV channels as such soon will cease to exist. We will have multi-platform media holdings, but I don't know. Again, maybe it will be some 1+1 in a number of channels, Telegram and something else. Why not? Well, it reminds me of a joke when the day is over at the hospital and the doctor says goodbye, goodbye Petrov, goodbye Sidorov, bye Petrov, bye Sidorov, and to you Ivanov, goodbye, farewell. So we'll say farewell to the channels. If we say farewell to all of them, so what remains? It's a problem. It's not a problem. It's like a tendency. The generation of content, it will always exist. There will be always consumption of the content. The question is how this content will be communicated to the consumer. But again, when you say the future of the market, to what extent are you confident that the market will exist? Well, there will be space, there will be this, but whether it will be a market, well, I'm not sure that this market existed before the war, so let alone after the war. So again, I wanted to mention the content that Oleksii said. I think that the role of productions that generate the content will increase in the production. They don't come into intergalactic levels just yet, but they come on a decent level right now. They will sell that content to Western market because the Russian market has closed to them. And I also think that there will be a reinforcement of local media, because during the reconstruction of Ukraine there will be a lot of attention paid to the spending of funds in the region. So I think the local media will be reinforcing, and I'm sure that there will be support by the media donors. They do it now, but again, they only do it under conditions that those media comply with the journalist standard. They don't want to spend their money in vain. Dear colleagues, I want to thank you for this conversation. It resulted to be very interesting. I want to thank you. I want to thank our spectators, the journalists, for the interest to this topic. Once again, happy Journalist Day to everybody. I wish each and every of you to write your news about the victory, to make a report about this. I wish everybody a good day. Thank you. Thanks to our armed forces, we can hold events like this. So glory to Ukraine.